Jake Murphy stood at his post near the main docking bay of Harmony Station. His dark green uniform was pressed and clean, his black boots polished to shine. The rifle on his back was standard human military issue, simple metal and plastic where other species carried glowing energy weapons. 3 years he had worked here, 3 years of keeping his mouth shut. The morning shift was always busy. Ships came and went from dozens of different worlds, bringing diplomats and trade officials to the floating station that orbited between Earth and Mars. Jake watched them all with careful eyes. The tall gray nebulans floated past in their environmental suits, their gas-filled bodies swirling like living clouds. The insect-like Kythera clicked across the metal floors on 6 legs, their compound eyes seeing everything at once. Then came the Zeltharians. Captain Vexthor led his group of reptilian soldiers through the docking bay like he owned the place. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that caught the station lights. Their energy rifles hummed with power, casting blue glows across their armored chests. Vexthor's yellow eyes found Jake immediately. "Look," Vexthor said to his soldiers, his voice carrying across the bay. "The human guard dog is at his post again. Such dedication to standing still and looking weak." The other Zeltharians laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Jake kept his face blank and stared straight ahead. His hands stayed at his sides, nowhere near his weapon. Commander Lisa Brooks had been very clear about the rules. No reactions, no responses. Keep the peace. "I wonder if he even knows how to use that ancient thing on his back," another Zeltharian said, pointing at Jake's rifle. "Humans still throw little metal pieces at their enemies. So primitive." Jake's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had heard this speech before. Many times. Vexthor walked closer, his clawed feet clicking on the deck plates. "Tell me, human, does your toy gun even work? Or is it just for show?" "Captain Vexthor," a new voice said. Commander Brooks approached from the main corridor, her blue uniform crisp and professional. At 40 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent 20 years in the diplomatic corps. "Welcome back to Harmony Station. I trust your visit to the Martian colonies was productive." The Zeltharian captain turned away from Jake without another word. Commander Brooks: "Yes, very productive. Though I was surprised to see how few defenses your colonies have. Just humans with their little metal shooters." Brooks smiled the same diplomatic smile she used for every difficult conversation. "Our colonies are peaceful places, Captain. We find that good neighbors rarely need impressive weapons." "Good neighbors," Vexthor repeated, his voice full of amusement. "Yes, humans are very good at being neighbors. So polite, so harmless." Jake felt his right hand twitch toward his sidearm. 3 years of this, 3 years of standing still, while they talked about humans like pets or children. His rifle held 30 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. His sidearm carried 15 more. The Zeltharians wore good armor, but human bullets were designed to punch through almost anything. He forced his hand to stay still. Orders were orders. "If you'll excuse me, Captain," Brooks said. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Murphy about security arrangements for tomorrow's trade meeting." Vexthor looked back at Jake with those yellow predator eyes. "Of course. I'm sure you have much to discuss about standing quietly and not getting in the way." The Zeltharians moved on toward the diplomatic section of the station. Jake watched them go, his blue eyes tracking their movement until they disappeared around a corner. "Walk with me, Lieutenant," Brooks said quietly. They moved to a nearby observation lounge, empty except for a few maintenance workers. Through the large windows, Earth hung in space like a blue and white marble. Jake had been born there, in the old city of Detroit. He remembered green grass and real sunlight, not the artificial light of space stations. "I know this is difficult," Brooks began. "The Zeltharians are challenging to work with." "They're bullies," Jake said simply. "Back home, we had a name for people who picked on others for fun. Back home didn't have trade agreements worth 50 billion credits," Brooks replied. "The Zeltharians control 3 major hyperspace routes. Earth needs those routes to reach the outer colonies. That means we need the Zeltharians happy. Jake nodded, but his expression didn't change. He was 32 years old and had spent 8 years in the Martian Colonial Defense Force before taking this job. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and raided illegal mining operations on the moons of Jupiter. He knew how to solve problems that didn't respond to polite conversation. "I understand the politics, Commander," he said, "but they're getting worse. Last week they accidentally blocked the corridor when Amy Carter was trying to get to an important meeting. The week before that, they spilled something caustic on the floor right where our people walk. Accidents happen," Brooks said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it either. "Not that many accidents," Jake replied. "Not that conveniently." Through the window, a Zeltharian transport ship was docking at one of the station's arms. Jake could see more soldiers inside, their armor gleaming under the ship's lights. The Zeltharians always traveled in groups, always armed, always ready to remind everyone else how strong they were. "Tomorrow's meeting is crucial," Brooks continued. "The new mining rights agreement could set up human colonies for the next 50 years. I need you to be professional no matter what they do or say." Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars. Finally, he spoke. "How long do we keep taking it, Commander? How long do we smile and nod while they treat us like we don't matter?" "As long as it takes," Brooks said firmly. "That's the job, Lieutenant. That's what keeps the peace." Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." But as they walked back toward the main corridor, Jake's mind was on other things. On the weapons, locker in his quarters. On the combat training he practiced every morning in the empty cargo bay. On the look in Vexthor's eyes when he talked about harmless humans with their little metal shooters. Everyone had limits, even patient people, even professional soldiers who followed orders and kept the peace. Jake just wondered what would happen when someone finally reached theirs. 2 weeks after the docking bay incident, things got worse. Jake was making his morning rounds through the station's residential section when he found the first broken piece of equipment. A human communication panel had been smashed, its screen cracked and wires hanging loose. The damage looked fresh, maybe an hour old. "Another accident," he muttered to himself, making notes on his electronic pad. By lunchtime, he had found 3 more broken items. A water recycling unit in the human quarters had been kicked until its casing cracked. Someone had poured a thick green liquid on the floor outside Amy Carter's room, leaving a stain that smelled like rotting fish. A food dispenser in the human section had been programmed to deliver only Zeltharian military rations, the kind that burned human throats. Jake stood in the corridor looking at the mess, his hands clenched into fists. The station's cleaning robots couldn't handle the green liquid. It would have to be cleaned by hand and the smell would take days to fade. "Lieutenant Murphy," a voice called behind him. He turned to see Chief Engineer Ben Walsh walking up the corridor. Ben was a big man, nearly as tall as Jake but twice as wide, with arms like tree trunks from 20 years of working with heavy machinery. His gray hair was always messy and his uniform always had grease stains, but he knew every pipe and wire on Harmony Station. "Hey, Ben," Jake said. "You seen this mess?" Ben looked at the green stain and shook his head. "Third one this week. Found another one near the engine room yesterday. Funny how they only show up near human areas." "Real funny," Jake agreed. They walked together toward the main engineering section. Ben's workshop was a maze of spare parts, half-built machines, and tools that Jake couldn't identify. The older man moved through the chaos like he knew where everything belonged. "You doing okay, Jake?" Ben asked, settling into his favorite chair. "You look like you haven't been sleeping." Jake sat on a workbench, careful not to disturb the electronic components scattered around him. "I'm fine. Just tired of cleaning up accidents." "Accidents." Ben laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know, in 20 years of running stations like this, I've never seen so many accidents happen to just one group of people." Jake was quiet. Through the workshop's small window, he could see a Zeltharian patrol walking through the corridor outside. 4 soldiers in full armor, energy rifles ready, moving like they were hunting something dangerous. On a peaceful diplomatic station. "I keep thinking about home," Jake said finally. "About Earth. About how we handle bullies there." "How's that?" Ben asked. "Simple. Someone pushes you, you push back. Someone breaks your stuff, you break theirs. Someone threatens your friends. You make them regret it. Ben nodded slowly. Different rules out here, though. Politics and all that. Yeah, politics. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the hum of the station's engines. Jake's mind wandered to his quarters, where his weapons waited, in their secure locker. The rifle had been his companion through 8 years of military service. He had cleaned it so many times he could do it blindfolded. Every part, every spring, every mechanism was familiar to his hands. You know what I don't understand? Ben said suddenly. What's that? Why they think we're weak. Humans, I mean. They see our simple weapons and think we're primitive. They see us being polite and think we're afraid. Jake looked at his friend. What do you think? Ben picked up a heavy wrench and held it in his massive hands. I think they've never seen what happens when humans stop being polite. That evening, Jake was walking to the dining hall when he heard voices from one of the side corridors. He recognized Amy Carter's voice, high and scared. Without thinking, he moved toward the sound. Around the corner, he found Amy backed against a wall by 3 Zeltharian soldiers. They weren't touching her, but they had formed a half-circle that blocked her escape. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the corridor lights. Please, Amy was saying, I need to get to my quarters. I have work to do. Work? One of the Zeltharians said, his voice full of mock surprise. What kind of work does a human do? Standing around looking helpless? The other soldiers laughed. Amy pressed herself further against the wall, her face pale. Jake stepped into the corridor. Is there a problem? Here? The Zeltharians turned to look at him. The largest one, a sergeant by his rank markings, smiled with too many teeth. No problem, human, just having a conversation with your friend. Looked more like intimidation to me, Jake said calmly. Intimidation? The sergeant moved closer to Jake. We would never intimidate anyone. We were just explaining to the young lady how dangerous these corridors can be. So many accidents lately. Jake's hand moved slightly toward his sidearm, then stopped. Amy was watching him with frightened eyes. The Zeltharians were all armed, their energy rifles humming with power. Amy, Jake said without taking his eyes off the soldiers. Go to your quarters. Now. She squeezed past the aliens and hurried away down the corridor. The Zeltharians watched her go, then turned back to Jake. Such a protective human, the sergeant said. Like a guard dog. Always ready to bark but never to bite. Maybe you should find somewhere else to be, Jake suggested. Or what? Another Zeltharian asked. You'll report us to your commander? Tell her we were walking in a public corridor? Jake stared at them for a long moment. 3 armed soldiers, each one bigger and stronger than him. Their armor would stop most weapons. Their energy rifles could cut through steel. By every logical measure, they were right to feel confident. But Jake was thinking about other things. About the rifle in his quarters that fired armor-piercing rounds. About the combat training he did every morning. About the fact that Zeltharian armor was designed to stop energy weapons, not kinetic ones. No, he said finally. I won't report, Hugh. The sergeant seemed surprised by this answer. Smart human, learning your place. Jake turned and walked away without another word. Behind him, he heard the Zeltharians laughing and talking in their own language. He kept walking until he reached his quarters, then locked the door behind him. He stood in front of his weapons locker for a long time, looking at the biometric lock. His rifle was inside, clean and ready. 30 rounds of ammunition that could punch through Zeltharian armor like paper. His sidearm with 15 more rounds just in case. He thought about Amy's frightened face, about the broken equipment and the green stains and the constant insults, about 3 years of standing still and taking it while they treated humans like pets. Everyone had limits. Jake was starting to wonder what his were. Instead of opening the locker, he went to his desk and wrote a detailed report about the corridor incident. He would give it to Commander Brooks in the morning, and she would file it away with all the others. Nothing would change. The Zeltharians would keep pushing, and humans would keep taking it. For now. Jake looked at the weapons locker one more time before going to bed. Tomorrow was another day of being professional. Another day of keeping the peace. He just wondered how many more days like that he had left in him. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Jake was walking through the station's central plaza, a large open area where all the corridors met. The plaza was the heart of Harmony Station, with shops and restaurants that served the different alien species. In the center stood a memorial wall made of polished black stone. Golden letters covered its surface, listing the names of humans who had died exploring space. Jake stopped in front of the wall like he did every morning. Near the top, in neat rows, were the names of the crew from the colony ship Endeavor. His father's name was there: William Murphy, chief engineer. Below that were the names of 3 friends from Jake's old military unit, killed when pirates attacked a mining station in the asteroid belt. He touched his father's name gently, a habit he had developed over 3 years of morning visits. The stone was always cool under his fingers, polished smooth by daily cleaning. "Touching memorial," a familiar voice said behind him. Jake turned to see Captain Vexthor approaching with 6 of his soldiers. They were dressed for a formal ceremony, their armor polished to shine, energy rifles held at parade rest. The other aliens in the plaza noticed them and moved away, giving the Zeltharians plenty of space. "Captain," Jake said politely. "Good morning." Vexthor studied the memorial wall with his yellow eyes. So many names, so many dead humans. I wonder if they were as weak as the living ones. Jake kept his face blank, but his hands slowly moved to rest at his sides, closer to his weapons. They were explorers. They died opening new worlds for everyone. Explorers, Vexthor repeated, tasting the word. Or perhaps they were just bad at staying alive. The other Zeltharians laughed. Jake noticed that the plaza was emptying quickly, as other aliens decided they had business elsewhere. Even the Kithra, who were usually fearless, were clicking away toward the far exits. "Today is a special day," Vexthor continued. "A celebration of the new trade agreements. All species working together in peace and cooperation." He pulled a small container from his belt. The liquid inside was the same green substance that had been appearing around the human sections of the station. It smelled like acid and rotting meat. "Unfortunately," Vexthor said, "there seem to be so many accidents lately. So much spilled material in unfortunate places." He held the container above the memorial wall. Jake's world went very quiet. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady. He could hear the hum of the station's air recyclers. He could hear the soft breathing of the Zeltharian soldiers as they waited to see what would happen next. "Captain," Jake said softly, "I wouldn't do that." "Wouldn't do what?" Vexthor asked, his voice full of fake innocence. This little accident?" He tilted the container. A few drops of the green liquid fell onto the memorial wall, hitting his father's name. The acid began to eat into the polished stone, creating ugly brown stains. Jake watched the chemical burn away the letters. WILLIAMMUR. The rest disappeared into bubbling scars. Something broke inside him. Not snapped, not exploded. Just quietly broke like a rope that had been stretched too far for too long. "Oops," Vexthor said, still pouring. "How clumsy of me. Such an unfortunate accident." The green liquid spread across the memorial, eating through dozens of names. The 3 friends from Jake's military unit vanished into smoking holes. Names of colony ship crews, exploration teams, and diplomatic envoys all began to dissolve. Jake looked at the destruction for a long moment. Then he looked at Vexthor, who was smiling with all his sharp teeth. "Thank you, Captain," Jake said calmly. Vexthor seemed surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For making this simple." Jake turned and walked away from the memorial wall. Behind him he heard Vexthor talking to his soldiers, probably making more jokes about weak humans and convenient accidents. Jake didn't listen. He had other things to think about. He walked through the corridors at normal speed, nodding politely to the few aliens he passed. His face was calm, his breathing steady. Anyone watching would think he was just a human security officer going about his daily duties. But inside his head, Jake was making calculations. The Zeltharians always traveled in groups of 6 or 8. They wore good armor, but it was designed to stop energy weapons. Human kinetic rounds would punch right through it. Their energy rifles were powerful but needed time to charge between shots. Human weapons fired as fast as you could pull the trigger. He reached his quarters and used his biometric scanner to open the weapons locker. His rifle was there, clean and ready. Standard military issue, 30 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. The gun was simple, reliable, and deadly, just like the humans who made it. Jake checked the weapon thoroughly, even though he knew it was perfect. Magazine full, safety on, barrel clean. He clipped extra magazines to his belt and holstered his sidearm. The familiar weight of the weapons felt good, like putting on clothes that fit perfectly. He looked at himself in the mirror, a human soldier, armed and ready. Not a guard dog, not a pet, not someone who would stand quietly while bullies destroyed things that mattered. Commander Brooks would be angry. Earth's government would be upset. The trade agreements might be damaged. Jake thought about all of this for exactly 3 seconds, then put it out of his mind. Some things were more important than politics. He left his quarters and walked back toward the central plaza. Other humans he passed looked at him strangely. They weren't used to seeing him in full combat gear, armed for war instead of ceremonial guard duty. Amy Carter was coming out of a shop when she saw him. Her eyes went wide. "Jake," she said. "What's happening? Why are you armed like that?" He paused and looked at her. Young, scared, trying so hard to be a good diplomat. She didn't deserve to be intimidated by aliens who thought humans were weak. "I'm going to fix a problem," he said simply. "What kind of problem?" Jake thought about his father's name dissolving in acid. About 3 years of insults and harassment. About Amy pressed against a corridor wall by soldiers who thought she was helpless. The kind that doesn't respond to polite conversation, he said. He continued walking toward the plaza. Behind him, Amy called his name, but he didn't turn around. He had work to do. The memorial wall came into view, still smoking from the acid damage. Captain Vexthor and his soldiers were still there, probably waiting to see if any humans would come to complain. They were about to learn something important about human nature. Jake checked his rifle one more time. 30 rounds, armor-piercing, ready to fire. His ammunition counter showed green, indicating a full load, but this wasn't about ammunition. This was about tolerance, and Jake had just run out of his. He stepped into the plaza, weapon ready, and everything changed. Jake stepped into the plaza with his rifle in his hands. The first thing he did was shoot out the main lights above the memorial wall. The plasma bulbs exploded in showers of sparks, dropping that section of the plaza into shadow. The Zeltharians spun around, their energy rifles humming to life, but they couldn't see him clearly anymore. "What is the meaning of this?" Captain Vexthor shouted into the darkness. Jake's voice came from somewhere in the shadows, calm and steady. "You wanted to see what humans do when they stop being polite." The first shot took out the communications device on a Zeltharian soldier's chest. The man stumbled backward. His armor cracked but not penetrated. Jake had aimed carefully. The second shot destroyed another soldier's energy rifle, the weapon sparking and dying in his hands. "Spread out," Vexthor ordered. "Find him." But Jake was already moving. 3 years of walking these corridors had taught him every corner, every shadow, every place where a man could hide. He slipped through the darkness like smoke, his black uniform blending with the shadows. A Zeltharian soldier rounded a corner and found himself facing Jake's rifle barrel. The shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. Not dead, but definitely out of the fight. "He's here!" the soldier shouted, but Jake was already gone, melted, back into the shadows. The station's alarm system began wailing. Emergency lights flashed red, casting weird shadows that moved and shifted. Perfect cover for someone who knew how to use it. Jake's voice echoed from the darkness again. "You called us weak. You said we were afraid of you." Another shot. Another. Zeltharian weapon destroyed. The soldiers were firing their energy rifles now. Bright blue beams cutting through the air, but they were shooting at shadows and echoes. "You're wrong about us," Jake continued, his voice coming from a different direction now. "We're not weak, we're patient, there's a difference." Captain Vexthor was breathing hard, his yellow eyes darting back and forth. "Show yourself, human, fight like a warrior." "I am fighting like a human," Jake replied. 2 more shots in quick succession. One soldier's helmet exploded off his head, leaving him dazed but alive. Another's armor took a direct hit, the kinetic round punching through like the protection was made of paper instead of military-grade composite. The Zeltharians were learning something new about human weapons. Energy rifles were impressive, but they took time to charge between shots. They created bright flashes that ruined night vision. They were built for show as much as function. Human weapons were different. They fired as fast as you could pull the trigger. They were quiet, with only a sharp crack and a muzzle flash. They didn't care about energy shields or impressive armor. A piece of metal moving fast enough would go through anything. Ben Walsh appeared at one of the plaza entrances, took one look at the chaos and quietly began working on a wall panel. The emergency lighting changed, dimming in some areas and brightening in others. New shadows appeared where Jake needed them. "Walsh!" Vexthor screamed. "Stop that!" "Stop what?" Ben called back innocently. "Just fixing some technical problems. Lots of accidents lately, you know." Jake used the new shadows to get closer. His rifle cracked again, taking out another soldier's weapon. 6 Zeltharians had entered the plaza. 4 were now disarmed, nursing wounds that hurt but wouldn't kill. Jake's ammunition counter still showed plenty of rounds remaining. "Surrender," Vexthor demanded. "You cannot win against all of us." "I'm not trying to win," Jake said from the darkness. "I'm making a point." The truth was, Jake could have killed them all in the first 30 seconds. His rifle held armor-piercing rounds designed to stop people wearing much better protection than the Zeltharians carried. Every shot he had fired was carefully placed to disable, not kill. He wasn't running out of ammunition. He was demonstrating something much more important. 2 more soldiers went down, their weapons destroyed, their armor cracked. They were alive, conscious, but no longer a threat. Jake's shots were precise, professional, exactly where he intended them to go. Commander Brooks arrived at the plaza with a squad of station security. She took one look at the scene and held up her hand, stopping her people from interfering. "Lieutenant Murphy," she called. "Stand down." "No, ma'am," Jake replied politely. "Not yet." Captain Vexthor was alone now, the last of his soldiers down. His energy rifle was charged and ready, but he couldn't see his target. Jake could be anywhere in the shadows, could shoot from any angle. "You see the problem with energy weapons?" Jake's voice came from somewhere above. Vexthor looked up, but saw only darkness. "They light you up like a signal flare. Everyone can see where you are." Vexthor fired at the sound, his blue beam cutting through empty air. The muzzle flash destroyed his night vision, leaving him blind in the darkness. Jake's rifle cracked, one final time. Vexthor's weapon exploded in his hands, the energy cell overloading. The captain stumbled backward, his armor smoking, his scales singed but not seriously hurt. Then Jake stepped out of the shadows, his rifle pointed at the ground. His ammunition counter still showed 23 rounds remaining. More than enough to finish the job, if that had been his intention. "You wanted to know what happens when humans stop being polite," Jake said calmly. "This is what happens. We stop pretending we're harmless." The plaza was silent except for the groaning of wounded Zeltharians and the wail of alarms. Captain Vexthor stared at Jake with new understanding in his yellow eyes. "You could have killed us all," he said quietly. "Yes," Jake agreed. "Easily. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." Vexthor looked around at his soldiers. All alive, all conscious, but thoroughly defeated by one human with a simple kinetic weapon. Their expensive armor had been useless. Their advanced energy rifles had been worse than useless, making them easy targets in the dark. "Why?" Vexthor asked. Jake looked at the damaged memorial wall, at his father's name half eaten away by acid. because this was about respect, not murder. You needed to learn that human patience is a choice, not weakness. Now you know. He safed his weapon and slung it across his back. Around the plaza, other aliens were watching from doorways and corridors. Kythera, with their compound eyes wide. Nebulons swirling nervously in their environmental suits. All of them seeing something they had never expected. A human who had stopped being patient. Commander Brooks approached carefully, her hands visible and empty. "Jake," she said softly. "It's over." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "It is." But everyone in the plaza knew that something fundamental had changed. The Zeltharians had learned that human restraint was a courtesy, not a limitation. The other aliens had seen what happened when that courtesy was withdrawn. Jake Murphy hadn't run out of ammunition. He had run out of tolerance, and that made all the difference. The medical team arrived 20 minutes later. Jake sat on a bench near the memorial wall, his rifle beside him, watching the doctors treat the wounded Zeltharians. None of the injuries were serious. Broken bones, burns from overloaded energy, cells cuts from armor fragments, the kind of wounds that would heal completely in a few weeks. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's chief medical officer, finished examining the last soldier and walked over to Commander Brooks. "They'll all be fine," she reported. Whoever did the shooting knew exactly what they were doing. Every wound was precisely placed to disable, not kill. Brooks looked at Jake. "Professional work." "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied quietly. Captain Vexthor approached them, moving slowly. His left arm was in a sling where shrapnel from his destroyed weapon had cut him. His armor was scorched black and several of his scales were singed, but he was walking under his own power. "Lieutenant Murphy," he said formally. Jake stood up. "Captain, I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air like something strange and unexpected. Around them, the plaza had filled with aliens from every species on the station. Kythera clicked nervously on their 6 legs. Nebulons swirled in their environmental suits. Even some humans had gathered to watch. "An apology?" Jake asked. Vexthor looked at the damaged memorial wall, then back at Jake. "My people have a saying. You cannot judge a warrior's strength by how he acts in peace. We thought humans were weak because you were patient. We were wrong." He reached into his armor and pulled out a small object. It was a Zeltharian military medal, bronze and green, shaped like a warrior's claw. "This is the mark of respect," Vexthor explained. "It is given to those who prove themselves in battle against worthy opponents. I would be honored if you would accept it." Jake looked at the medal for a long moment. 3 years ago, he would have been angry at the offer. 3 hours ago, he would have rejected it. Now, it seemed like something different. Not a prize for violence, but recognition of something more important. He took the medal. "Thank you, Captain." Vexthor nodded slowly. "My soldiers and I will return to our ship tomorrow. Before we go, we will help repair the memorial wall. It was wrong to damage something that honors your dead." "I appreciate that," Jake said. The Zeltharian captain looked around the plaza, at all the watching aliens. "I think many species will want to reconsider their opinions about humans." He was right. Jake could see it in their faces. The Kythera were looking at him with their compound eyes, probably calculating how fast human weapons could fire. The Nebulons were pulsing different colors, which Jake had learned meant they were excited or nervous. A new voice spoke from the crowd. "Lieutenant Murphy?" Jake turned to see Ambassador Thylex, the senior Kythera diplomat. The insect-like alien approached on 6 legs, his mandibles clicking softly. "Ambassador," Jake said politely, "my people have been watching today's events with great interest," Thylex said in his translated voice. "We are currently having difficulties with raiders along our border worlds. Perhaps we could discuss trade agreements for human military advisors." Before Jake could answer, another voice interrupted. "The Nebulon Collective would also be interested in such discussions," said Coordinator Zeph, floating closer in his environmental suit. "Your tactical abilities are most impressive." Commander Brooks stepped forward. Gentlemen, I think we should discuss this in a more formal setting. Perhaps tomorrow, in the diplomatic conference room. The aliens agreed and began to disperse, but Jake could hear them talking in their own languages. Words like effective and dangerous and respect came through the translation devices clearly. Amy Carter appeared at Jake's side. She looked nervous but determined. "Jake," she said, "are you in trouble?" He thought about it seriously. "Probably. I disobeyed orders, engaged in combat without authorization, and damaged diplomatic relations. But also," Brooks added, "he demonstrated that human patience has limits, prevented future harassment, and apparently opened new opportunities for military cooperation agreements." Ben Walsh walked over from where he had been fixing the lighting systems. "Sometimes," he said with a grin, "the best way to keep the peace is to show people what happens when it breaks." Jake looked around the plaza. The emergency lights had been replaced with normal illumination. The wounded Zeltharians were being helped to the medical bay. The memorial wall stood damaged, but not destroyed, like a reminder of what had happened. "Here, what happens now?" Amy asked. "Now," Brooks said, "we clean up the mess and figure out how to explain this to Earth Command." Jake picked up his rifle and checked it one more time. The ammunition counter showed 23 rounds remaining. He had used 7 shots to disable 8 soldiers and destroy 6 energy weapons. Not bad for an average day's work. "Commander," he said, "permission to return to duty?" Brooks looked at him for a long moment. "You know this changes things. The other species will expect different behavior from humans now. They'll test us, try to see if we're all as dangerous as you proved to be today." "Good," Jake said simply. "Maybe they'll be more polite about it." He walked toward the corridor that led to his quarters. Behind him, he could hear Brooks talking to the aliens about scheduling meetings and renegotiating agreements. The politics would sort themselves out one way or another. In his quarters, Jake cleaned his rifle thoroughly and returned it to the weapons locker. The familiar routine was calming after the chaos of the day. Every part checked, every mechanism tested, everything ready for the next time it might be needed. He looked at the Zeltharian medal sitting on his desk, the mark of respect. 3 years ago, he had wanted respect. Today, he had earned it, not through patience or politeness, but by showing that human restraint was a choice, not a requirement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Other species would test human resolve, try to find the limits of human patience. Some would be disappointed to learn that those limits existed. But tonight, Jake Murphy sat in his quarters and looked at a medal given to him by an enemy who had become something like a friend. Outside his window, the stars shone cold and distant, full of worlds where humans were no longer seen as harmless. That seemed like a good thing. Jake had not run out of ammunition. He had plenty of rounds left, and he would keep them ready. Because the galaxy was a dangerous place, and sometimes the only way to keep peace was to show people what happened when it ended. The human had run out of tolerance, and everyone was better off for knowing it.